Good afternoon and welcome to the Sam Lacrosse Show. Happy Monday to everybody. On September 16th, 2014, Peter Thiel published the most famous book on Silicon Valley entrepreneurship in recent memory and probably ever, 0 to 1. Thiel, one of the primary funders of the Trump administration, who also deals weapons to the IDF while building a social credit system within the U.S. government and lecturing on the Antichrist in his free time, is also one of the most pure entrepreneurial minds of our time and of all time. Regardless of what you think of him, what he has to say is both important and relevant to the time in which we live. Being in the space of thought leadership and writing, books are a very interesting thing to observe. I'm a massive fan of them, obviously. I've written 3 of them. I am of the belief that the number one way you can improve your intelligence is by reading, and by reading a lot. Self-education is indeed the best type of education. As the title or character once said in Good Will Hunting, you spent $150,000 in an education that I got for $1.50 in late charges at the local library. Truer words have hardly ever been spoken. If you read, you get smarter. Simple as that. But books have a fundamental flaw, particularly in the realms of business, entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology. Particularly if the authors choose to go through traditional publishing houses, books always lag reality by, at minimum, a couple of months. For example, my 3rd book was focused on how an underreported demographic of ableism was corrupting American culture, and it was published in June of 2025, so whoops. All of that to say, timing with books is everything. I've talked to many well-known authors who have told me to my face that they have canned books they've been working on for years for one simple reason. The world around them changed. Their work was no longer relevant because the world around them, the one they constructed their book to fit within, was no longer relevant. Therefore, the best authors are the ones who make books that transcend cultural moments. The ones who don't just talk about what happens, but what always did and always will happen. The reason why Ship of Fools by Tucker Carlson is the most influential political book I've ever read is because its primary theme, the corruption of leadership, and our leaders in America specifically, has never changed. Because leaders will always be corrupt. The reason why The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is the best personal finance I've ever read and the best one in recent memory and maybe ever is because his primary theme, the way the brain works in regards to finances, has never changed. Because our brains will always succumb to greed. The reason why The Subtle Art by Mark Manson was the book that most radically changed my life, kickstarted my entire career in media, and became the best self-help book of the last 25 years is because his primary theme, choosing what you care about based on your values, has, wait for it, never changed. Humans will always care too much about the things that don't matter. In a callback to Housel, same as ever, as with everything. And this is why I, for the most part, never read nor recommend books that are centered on business, entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology. Most authors in the space cannot see the forest through the trees. They can talk about things like AI, data platform, financial securities, and strategies on leadership now. But what about in 5 years from now, when technology has changed all of it? Well, it won't be relevant, of course. Everything, if you're going to hone in on what's going on now, will change. Perspective is everything. So given this, why does Thiel's book to this day stand out? What makes it different? Peter Thiel is a lot of things, many of which people, myself certainly included, don't like. But one of those things that most defines Peter Thiel is his intelligence. He's far from dumb. That intelligence is what defined his thesis of 0 to 1. He, along with his then protege Blake Masters, who I love, believe it or not, struck the balance perfectly with this book, which is why it has been essentially become biblical to all of those who want to follow his footsteps in Silicon Valley. If perspective is everything, then Thiel is the first, and I would argue the only one who has gotten that perspective correct. That perspective? According to Thiel, there are 2 things that everyone, particularly every tech entrepreneur, needs to know about innovation. First, true innovation in any area of the world is rare. Second, what most people consider quote-unquote innovation, doing something totally new, isn't innovation actually at all. And this may cause you to be confused, and it certainly did with me when I first read it. So to alleviate that confusion, let's go through these points one at a time. First, true innovation hardly ever happens because there is hardly any incentive for true innovation. The reason? True innovation requires risk. Big risks in large capacities require big support structures, most certainly like capital investment and a team bold enough to believe in you. Financial institutions such as banks and venture capital firms need a return on their investment to make money. So knowing this, all we need to do is follow the incentives. The biggest one? Don't step too far out of bounds, or we won't fund you, work for you, or champion what you're building. Which leads to the second point that Thiel made. Given this incentive structure, true innovation is very rare, and much more rare than people think. Take AI, for example. We hear all the time about how AI is the greatest innovation of our time. ChatGPT is our generation's iPhone. Millions are going to be out of work. Sam Altman and Jensen Huang are gods. But this isn't true. Why? As said correctly by Thiel, AI is just another version of something we've had in our hands for 50 years. Software. It may be the most high-powered form of software we've ever had, which is both good and true, but it's not at its core any different from what Microsoft built in the 1970s. Every AI firm in Silicon Valley can find the two things that generally run away from true innovation: lots of money and lots of people who want to work. Contrast this with someone like Peter Thiel's friend Elon Musk and his most innovative company, SpaceX. Privatizing space travel, reusable rockets, catching flying projectiles out of the sky, blowing up far more rockets than you launch, all of which cost millions of dollars to build. Hardly any money flows there, which is why he's the only one to do it sustainably. Hardly anyone is crazy enough to work for a company like that one, which is exactly why, at the time of this recording, Elon Musk is the richest person in the world and on pace to be a trillionaire by the end of his life. Money follows innovation, which is why money has followed Elon Musk. To use Thiel's words, he and very few others have gone truly 0 to 1, which is why Elon Musk will live in history forever, while most of these AI quote-unquote entrepreneurs won't last another 6 months. So taking this all into context, what does this mean for our economy? Well, for one, it means all of the people who talk so highly of quote-unquote innovation are largely wrong. And second, where is all the actual innovation going on? Our stock market's still going up. People are still getting rich. Innovation is clearly still happening. The only question is where. And the person who answered this question for me and opened my eyes to this whole phenomenon was Scott Galloway. Galloway, one of the biggest rising influential voices in the world, particularly for a man on the political left, is intelligent, like Thiel, about many things. Galloway is also a serial entrepreneur, one of the few who understands innovation and actually how it works. In 2023, Galloway said something that rocked my world and changed my perspective on everything regarding economic innovation. Quote, "I think GLP-1, the active ingredient in Ozempic, is going to be bigger than GPT, #AI, end quote. So if you look at that quote through the traditional lens of what most people consider innovation, you'll think Galloway's nuts. But if you look at it through Thiel's lens of innovation, which is all we know to be true, or we all know now to be true, you would think Galloway is a visionary. And on this point, he certainly is. Innovation at its core compels and incentivizes people to change their lives, to adapt around the technology itself. That said, compare AI and GLP-1s. When you look at the impact of these technologies, it's not close. And I'll start with a personal example. My mom has traveled down to Austin several times to see me from Cleveland, Ohio, which I always enjoy, for the record. Almost every time she's been down here, we've thrown some sort of a party. To prepare for that party, she always makes an effort to grab alcohol and snack foods so that people are entertained. Unfortunately for her, her efforts have always gone in vain. Of the hundreds of dollars we spent on snack food, mostly processed carbs, fats, and sugars, as well as alcohol, hardly any of it has been eaten. Perhaps more wildly, on the alcohol point, not a single one of our alcoholic beverages we've bought, from homemade margaritas to White Claws, has ever been drunk. So why is this? Well, the answer is that America is innovating based on our health, defined in many ways by the advancement of GLP-1s. Health consciousness is a very good thing. Looking back on it, it's hilarious. Remember quote-unquote body positivity and quote-unquote fat activism? I know I do. The commonality between both is that it was never okay to be fat. It was a psyop. It was only quote-unquote okay because it was socially acceptable to be fat. Being skinny and in shape is always a better option, which is why Ozempic by far is going to outlive ChatGPT in influence, and it's all getting consumed by people who pushed the fat activism narrative. I hardly know anyone who uses AI regularly. I know a lot of fat people. It's not only a matter of utility, it's a matter of market share. To create an empire, whoever has more of both, generally speaking, wins. But let's go a level deeper. What's really going on with our economy and with innovation? On what grounds and lines is it really being transformed? Are having things like GLP-1 drugs normalized a healthy thing for everybody? The answer to these questions, obviously, is a flat no. GLP-1s, like more and more things we're seeing in our world, are a cheat code. They're a hack, a farce, a short-term solution for the long-term problem of obesity. Oh, and by the way, people are discovering they don't work nearly as well as we initially thought. Hint, like all new technologies don't work as well as they do when they first go to market. Yet we have transformed our economy on these and many other grounds, and I would alter permanently, at least in the short term. We have normalized GLP-1s and everything like them. These short-term and short-sighted hacks that have seemingly everyone, particularly young people, completely enslaved to them. This has never been possible in any other time but ours. And not only is it possible, it's now mainstreamed. Many people in our chattering class and quote-unquote scientific community, whatever that means, have dubbed this phenomenon the quote-unquote attention economy. An economy that is built on keeping us glued to cheap labor, cheap dopamine hits, and even cheaper highs on our phones. But this description is both inaccurate and incomplete. What is actually happening to our economy, where the actual innovation is happening, is something far different than simply hacking our attention spans. It's much deeper than that, much more primal than that. It's de-evolutionary, and it's demonic. Therefore, there is only one proper phrase that can define it and describe it: the addiction economy. The largest spurts of innovation in our modern world by far have come from those who seek to hijack the most primary thing about us: our minds, the things that make us human, the things that make us different from and above all the rest of the animals, as God ordained it to be. The sad thing is that now that this has happened, we are no different from the animals at all. We have the same instincts, the same thought patterns, the same animalistic urges. We've always had them. Now, we just have an excuse to let them off the leash. On a podcast with Chris Williamson recently, Mary Harrington, who is no exaggeration one of the greatest and most important thinkers of our time, described this phenomenon better than I'd ever heard it before: limbic capitalism. Limbic capitalism, the new economic market that is now poisoning every part of our brains, bodies, and souls, is where all of the money in our economy is going, where all the innovation is happening, where all the growth is happening. And when you think about it, this is everywhere. AI and social media algorithms, cheap labor that staffs our companies to enhance the profits of crony capitalists, cheap food puffed full of chemicals, poisons, and toxins that we place primarily in minorities and poor communities, quote-unquote sexual health clinics like Planned Parenthood, also in those same areas that commit genocide. The goal of all of them is the same: to hook our brains on taking shortcuts just enough so that we never believe that anything is enough. If you pull the lever of the slot machine once again, you need to do it again, again, and again. To understand how this works, we need to understand the first part of Harrington's phrase. The limbic system, for those who don't know, is the part of the brain that lies within the cerebrum. The cerebrum's primary function, for those who don't know, from all available data and studies that we have, is to regulate our emotions and what drives them. Of many things, its primary responsibilities include emotional management and regulation, motivation, memory, and survival behaviors, like compulsion and fight or flight. As described by my hometown Cleveland Clinic, the greatest medical system in our country, its primary intentions and purposes are twofold: to connect primary drives with higher thoughts and linking sense to emotions and memories, which are intertwined together. In short, the limbic system controls everything about you. Everything. As noted by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their iconic book, Thinking Fast and Slow, we do not control our emotions. Our only job is to layer our logical brain as best we can on top of the emotional one to do damage control. So now that we know this, a question: if our corporations have found a way to control the limbic system, the system that controls our brains, what kind of shot do we have to control our brains? Answer: we don't. We're both outmanned and outgunned. They are pouring millions upon millions of dollars into the absolute demolition of our emotional control, regulation, and systems. As Peter Thiel said, innovation pays well. Think of all the systems in our country that play a part in the explosion of limbic capitalism. There is hardly a sector in our economy, with the exception of utilities, and even that's up in the air, that is not totally held captive by limbic capitalism, by exploiting its consumer base, by manipulating the very things that make us human, our brains, and how we use them to go about living our lives. From my vantage point, limbic capitalism has three primary vectors that make it possible, which we will be breaking down for this entire show: what we consume physically, what we consume digitally, and how we go about that consumption. Their job, as you can probably tell by this point, is to keep us consuming, feeding the machine, hijacking the limbic system, emotionally blackmailing you into thinking you're not doing enough, spending enough, being enough for yourself and your life. Its goal is to put you in a permanent mindset of lack and scarcity, of constantly pining for something you can never achieve. It is also important to note that this is not quote unquote consumerism, as people typically frame it, like buying a fourth couch for your living room or something, although online shopping is still a major issue and does fall into limbic capitalism. The people who are enslaved to limbic capitalism are not doing it for clout and status. They're doing it because they feel they need to, because their brains are telling them they do need to. Just open up a fourth credit card. What's the harm? Just scroll for another 30 minutes. You work hard today. You're already halfway through the gallon of H-E-B ice cream. Just finish the thing. You deserve it. But do you? You probably don't, actually. And worst of all, you probably know that you don't. The only issue is that you can't help it because you're enslaved to limbic capitalism. You're just a cog in the machine. The trick with all the elements of limbic capitalism is a bait and switch. They market a bunch of products, talk about a lot of services, but never reveal who the real product actually is and the real service that product provides them. You. You are the product. Your brain is the product. Your impulses, your feelings, your thoughts are the product. You are what they're selling. Their only job is to treat you like an animal, to keep feeding you over and over again until you keel over from overstimulation. The only problem for you, you won't receive that level of mercy that animals do. Your brain is the most powerful thing that God ever made. It can take a lot of punishment, which our limbic capitalists know all too well. I, as an actual capitalist, take issue with this. People are not products. We learned that with things like feudalism, human trafficking, and the transatlantic slave trade. And the same is true now. It is dehumanizing and wrong for American corporations, in collusion with the U.S. government, let's be frank, to deliberately exploit the American citizen, to willingly cause him or her harm, to only do so to extract profit out of them like some kind of an object, which is why that must be called out, dissected, and stopped. Limbic capitalism is everywhere. There has not been nearly the effort needed in order to stop it. So to do so, we must be completely honest with the manufacturing of our addiction economy and, more importantly, to refuse its tendencies to intercede in our lives. We must say no. We must resist. We must take back our economy and purify it by taking back and purifying the one thing that is most in its way, our brains and the sanctity of them. Okay, so how did this happen? How did our economy get hijacked where it became not only knowledge focused? We live in a knowledge economy. That's another common phrase you hear now with our economic thinking people, whatever that means. But not only from a knowledge economy, but from a bottom of the brain stem extraction economy. I think that would be another good way to put it. They want to the people that are in control of our economic levers, the main offenders of this limbic capitalism, are extracting the very raw essence of how you are a human, and they're pulling it out of people. They're pulling it out of the base of their brain and putting it on display for everybody. So that's a very important question, and I think we should find out the answer to that. So from my research and from everything that I see, limbic capitalism was able to take over the world because of two primary factors. The people that enabled them found out about how to hijack the human brain, and they found a way to democratize it to everybody else. So there's two parts of this, right? You had to figure out how to crack the code. It's like any business that you want to start. You have to find out what people want or what to sell and a market for it. So you need a what, something to sell, a product, a service, whatever. And then you need to find a way to get the most people possible that product or service. So this is the whole democratizing thing that I talked about earlier on. Market share matters. And the thing about limbic capitalism, as it's progressed throughout this entire time that we've been talking about it and seeing it and everything, is that it has become easier and easier and easier and easier to hook people on it. So our products and our services and everything that we consume is becoming more and more and more and more and more addictive throughout the entire time, which is obviously very bad for everybody else. So you need something to sell people. You need to find a way to the bottom of the brainstem in our limbic economy, as we're talking about. And you need to find a way to get everybody access across multiple streams, layers, platforms, foundations of the economy. And I think it's interesting because it's very hard to get people addicted to so many things. And that's kind of counterintuitive statement now because so many people are addicted to things. I'm addicted to things. You're addicted to things. Lots of people are addicted to things. I mean, everyone is at least addicted to something. But to do that in so many ways, where so much of our country is so dependent on everything from streaming services to pain medication to, everything in between that, whether it's quote unquote essential or not, it's everywhere. Like I said, we can't go through our days without seeing the effects of this. And so what this means is that the people who run limbic capitalism, they needed a mechanism in order to spread this across the masses. So the other thing about business is that limbic capitalism and basically the addiction economy, once people found out how to do it, starting with really the cigarette companies back in the mid to early 20th century, a bunch of things like that. That's really the first thing they had. With alcohol was a part of this, but really it started going with cigarettes because that was advertising, and Edward Bernays and all the other type of things. He's a fascinating person. If you want to read about the guy who basically caused all this, Edward Bernays is your guy. And so with all of that being mass media, placement on large television channels, radio, all that sort of thing. And so once they found a way to plant the seed of this, the next thing they needed to do was to get people to consume more and more and more across multiple channels. And so they needed a mechanism, the people who run these limbic capitalist institutions, which we're going to talk about all throughout the show, they needed a lever to pull that would yank up their ability to spread this across the economy and across the American consumer base. And in my view, the mechanism they found that worked the best and that is currently destroying our economy and working the best now was debt and our collective addiction as Americans to debt. Debt was not a thing for a very, very long time, at least in the terms we're talking right now with credit cards and 30% interest rate. And a lot of people, back in the day, I mean, the worst debt was probably indentured servitude, where you had to work for someone for free if you were indebted to them. And I would think all world religions, I know Judaism and Christianity and Islam, all the Abrahamic religions, I'm not sure about the more Eastern religions, they've all warned against debt and getting into bed with people who want to loan you money or shark you or something like that. And so, but America fell for that trap. Because after World War II, as television became a massive thing, as we wanted bigger houses and better refrigerators and more decorations for holidays and everything like that, this kind of rabbit's race, keeping up with the Joneses sort of thing, rat race, keeping up with the Joneses element of everything, that was the thing that fueled all of it. That was the hook that we all as Americans bid onto to have the people in charge of limbic capitalism and these corporations that we're talking about yank us out of the water. That was the biggest thing. And particularly with the economic conditions that surround us right now, people may shake their heads at this and they may say from an objective perspective, how many people can be addicted to multiple things? And what I would tell this person, like, how are people, like you're saying all this stuff about people are addicted to everything and our economy's built on addiction, things, that's a bold claim. I know that's a bold claim. But the answer to all of them is to take them down to bite-sized pieces. So when you look at all of our sectors of our economy, right, when you look at housing and finance, and finance is I would say it is a sector, but it's also the one that's pilfered into all these ones. When you look at consumer goods, when you look at food, when you look at everything that really surrounds us, you realize that every part of our economy is financialized and has become financialized. And that's never happened before, ever. Like, you can buy sushi on a buy now, pay later solution. Like, that's bananas. We've never been able to do that. If you didn't have money to eat at a restaurant or to order off of a restaurant app up until very recently, if you didn't have the money to buy food and to pay for your server and to tip well and everything like that, you couldn't eat at the restaurant. They would kick you out. They would do everything else. That's why they don't serve homeless people. And some restaurants, they have things, they give a guy, they give the guy a burger or a taco or something like that. And they kind of say like, hey man, here you go. They don't want people to starve. Obviously, I'm not saying all this is bad. But when a restaurant allows you to say, hey, you can eat here for 4 easy payments with a 20% interest rate tacked on that's going to go to this buy now, pay later solution that's owned by an overseas company, that's never happened before. And that's happening with everything. I guarantee you. So we're coming up on Christmas. I think when this comes out, it's going to be about 2 weeks away. I guarantee you, I would probably argue over half of American parents this Christmas, that would be my guess. I have no numbers on this, but that would be my guess, are going to buy their kids Christmas gifts on some form of debt. A credit card, a loan, a buy now, pay later solution, something like that. I guarantee you that's going to happen. I guarantee it. And so what does that say about where we are and how the addiction economy has been enabled? You're not addicted to a certain thing in the limbic economy or the limbic capitalist system. That's not how this works. You by nature, because everything has become financialized, you are by your nature addicted to everything because it's embedded inside of its nature, because you have to keep making the payments. You have to keep making the payments because if you don't make the payments, they'll take back what the thing is. You will not be able to buy sushi on Klarna. And what addiction does is it provides a less serious dopamine hit, a less severe dopamine hit every single time you take a hit of something. And that, when you take it away, when you stop the stimulation generally, the brain flatlines and your body starts to go haywire a bit. And so even if the dopamine hits that are sequenced over and over and over again when you're paying off something or when you're using something or when you're eating something or when you're consuming something, it gets less and less and less. It doesn't matter because getting rid of the thing generally is what people are afraid of because that's how the brain works. That's brain chemistry 101. And so how did this start? How did the limbic economy and the addiction economy start? It started obviously with aggressive rates on mortgages. So for people who wanted to buy homes, when people said, it used to be that you had to buy a home in cash. You had to save up for a home. And, they said, hey, if you don't have the price in full, you can make, maybe you can pay it in like a 2-pay or something like that. But it used to be that the banking industry largely was out of the home industry. It was largely built for, some businesses had debt, a lot of other things had debt. But now with the current structure in American society, cash buy real estate where you just pay for a home in cash, like that's gone. That's gone. And the lending companies, the credit agencies, the lending companies, the banks, the financial institutions, they all know this. They know that home prices are out of control. And so now they realize that almost every person who wants to buy a home has to go through them. And so what they do, knowing this, and the government checks this, quote unquote, but I don't know if they do that, aggressive of a job or not, is that they jack their rates up because they can. It's a monopoly. They jack their rates up because they can. That's what all monopolies do, to be fair. It's not just the housing, the lending companies, but everybody jacks their stuff up. And so when housing became more expensive and basically Americans' pockets got squeezed further, what's the next big thing? Car loans. You have a car note because you can't buy a car in cash. Hardly anyone can buy a car in cash now. It's much less expensive than a house in some cases, unless you're buying a Rolls or something like that. That's fine. But it spread to cars. It spread to other things. It spread, all these big purchases, washing machines, roofs, everything you would need for your house, a shed for your backyard with tools, home equipment, lawnmowers, all those things. And now, since everyone is hooked on the long-term consequences of debt and how much it plays itself out over time, our limbic capitalists, the addiction economy people that are in the financial sector, they have spread it out to even smaller assets. From your phone, from your dresser that you put in your room, from your desk, from your computer, to your television, everything has become financialized. Everything. It doesn't matter how small it is. Everything has a solution. Just don't have the money now, fine. Put it on credit. Take out a loan for it. Do something like that. Open up a mortgage on your house, second mortgage on your house for it. Like, that's nuts. That is absolutely nuts that is the thing. But it's happened. And it happened with the physical assets of what we wanted to do that drove American consumerism. And this got pushed into overdrive with the complete explosion of credit cards. Well, two things, credit cards and student loans. The student loan industry did not exist a couple of decades ago, which is wild because I think as of right now, I think the collective student loan obligation in this country is now like $1.7 trillion, all created in the last probably, 30 years? I would say probably 30 years, maybe 40 years, but definitely 30 years since the mid-90s or the early 90s when college education started getting emphasized and after NAFTA and everything like that. So I would say probably 30 years. And the average American right now, if you take the average citizen, the average adult in this country, they are $30,000 in credit card debt. Now, that's the average, so are some people way high? Yes. Or some people way low? Yes. But the average is still not good. That's not the mode of everything. That's not the median of everything. That's kind of where, people are going from that standpoint. That's the mode. That's the average. But the average American is $30,000 of credit card debt. Think of what that means. That's not a mortgage with now 6 or 7% interest. That's not a car loan with about, 6% interest. This is a credit card, a revolving line of credit on multiple cards, because no one hardly in America, unless you have great credit, you have a savvy investment strategy, you run a business, but the average American consumer, that is spread on multiple cards. There ain't no way you can get a $30,000 line of credit from one card. You need multiple cards. So that's multiple cards, multiple different interest rates, all at least at 18% APR, at least 18%, and probably higher after a while, because this builds on itself after a while. Like when you break down how deep this actually goes, it's just insane. It's completely nuts. And it's demonic, by the way. It's a satanic thing to enslave people, to control people. But no one seems to care. No one cares. In the power structure, at least, in our country. But that's the point. That's the point. Because when no one owns anything, you have to go to other people that have to have that lifestyle come back for yourself. This is why the you'll own nothing and be happy people are nuts and why they're evil. When no one owns anything, when there is no ownership in a society, when everything from, again, your dishes to your car to your home to your washing machine is all owned by somebody else and you're just renting it or leasing it, you have to become addicted to everything. You don't have a choice. When you can't afford anything, when you're hooked on all this debt, you have no choice but to play the game. You have no choice but to make the payments. You have no choice but to shackle yourself into thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to get yourself out of where you want to be. And that is really, it's really troubling. It's really, really frightening. And we should see it as such, because if we don't address this now, and again, I'm a capitalist, but I would argue that finance is not capitalism. Finance is an assistant to capitalism. It can help, fund a loan, fund, something else, et cetera, all that sort of stuff. But when debt becomes everything, when you hook the American consumer on debt to financialize and incentivize everything in that way, I mean, we're in a heap of trouble if that is the case, which it is. And so we need to talk about it, we need to address it, and we need to fix it, because if we don't, then it's just, we're in a heap of trouble. Just put it that way, heap of trouble. I think it's important to talk about this as well. Like, I'm a capitalist. I'll make that clear for like the fifth time already, but I am not just a blame the institution, blame corporate America, blame the government, blame Citibank, blame, all these other things that people do. That's what the lefties do in terms of socialism and, we got to redistribute wealth and, tax the rich and everything like that. It's like, well, no, actually. Well, maybe in some ways. I'm not opposed to that, generally speaking. But, in terms of the redistribution of finances, redistribution of wealth, the seizing of assets blatantly against the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, by the way, that's neither here nor there. Don't want to get into that debate right now, but that's what that is, the seizure of private property. But we need to hone in on the fact that this is still an individual choice. You do still have agency as a person inside of our economy. You are not totally backdoored by everything. You have an agency, you have choice, and we should incentivize that and instill that into our kids, into our young people, everything like that. And so but we are, in large part, this is where I'm coming from, particularly on this episode, but in my philosophy generally, I would say, is that everybody is a product of their environment in some way, shape, or form. Now, Do you have to stay a part of that environment if that environment's not healthy? Absolutely not. You can change your life. I know a lot of people who have changed their environments for the better. But for me, I grew up the way that I grew up. I have experiences that no one else does because no one else had my family. You did as well. The person, your best friend, did as well. The person you hate the most did as well. And so we are not born into a mold. We have to learn and adapt, and we are shaped and molded largely by other people, other experiences, etc. That does not mean that our experiences have defined them. To define you, I would argue that you should not do that, actually. But the environment of America over the past 60 years, so we're all products of environments. Let's take the citizens of this country, the citizens of America over the last 60 years, has been defined largely by limbic capitalism, by the hijacking of the human brain, by understanding how the brain becomes addicted. Watch The Social Dilemma, even though that was a bit, raw of everything else with Tristan Harris and all those guys that are in that movie and everything else. And the enabling of that addiction by democratizing the addiction economy and the limbic capitalists through debt. So the two factors again. The limbic capitalists had to find out how to hijack the human brain, which they found out how to, understand how they become addicted, cool, and then enable that addiction by democratizing all of the addictions throughout our entire economy, which everything has been financialized by this point, through debt. But what we need to get into now is that is the how of everything. But now we need to break this down into the two whats of everything. So we have still not asked the question of how the physical consumption started. How did all this start in terms of physically consuming things? And the biggest way this manifested, I believe, particularly before the internet, was in the physical world through, I'm talking about limbic capitalism here. The biggest way that limbic capitalism, I think, is represented, the biggest way, and before the internet and now that this is a big issue and thing that we're talking about now, thankfully, was in the physical world through two primary things: the food we eat and the advancement of the pharma companies, the pharmaceutical industry. And so what happened was, as soon as, if you've seen Mad Men, you've seen this before, but in the 1960s, when the United States government and a lot of NGOs and nonprofits started to really crack down on the cigarette industry and the tobacco industry. Tobacco gives you cancer, tobacco gives you hypertension, which leads to heart disease and stroke and everything like that. And so as soon as those vectors started to get, they got the whip cracked on them by the government, by all these other institutions, and there was a massive campaign to say people shouldn't smoke anymore, stop smoking. The others needed to keep their jobs, because their job, whether it's William Morris or not William Morris, who's that cigarette company? Philip Morris, a cigarette company. Philip Morris, they were like, oh boy, well, we have a bunch of people who are selling addictive products, who are making addictive products, who are marketing addictive products that need jobs. And so what they did was they said, okay, fine. So cigarettes are going away. They're going to become a lot less popular. That revenue stream is basically dead or dying by this point. So what did they do? They bought up food companies, or they went to the pharmaceutical industry, which really wasn't a big thing back in the day, but now it was becoming more and more of a thing as things like vaccines got popularized and low ticket over the counter drugs got invented and everything like that. Tylenol, Advil, all those things. Now, a lot of those aren't even pharmaceuticals, but the generalized drugs at this point, and pharmaceuticals, which are a higher level above, like things you can buy over the counter at CVS. And so the people in this space, in the former cigarette industry, now going into the food space, they bought up all these food companies. They bought up Kraft Heinz. What is the one I'm thinking of? I'll come to it later on. But they bought up all these food companies. It's a really, really fascinating story. And what the folks that were running these companies, the old cigarette companies, now the food companies, realized was that they could still hijack the limbic system. They could still keep people addicted, but not by selling them cigarettes and telling them to light up on the side of the street. But now they could still hijack, and did hijack, the limbic system by perverting our food, not into something that keeps us healthy, but something that keeps us unhealthy. That was their strategy. And so, there's that famous video that JFK put out when he did a speech on American health, I think in 1961 at American University, if I'm getting that right. And there was this video that they put out with these ripped like high school students out in California. They all had six packs. They all had biceps. They all had, pecs, everything like that. And they saw that, them being the limbic capitalists, the food companies and the former cigarette companies. And they said, okay, well, if we can't do it with cigarettes, we'll do it with food. And since they owned the means of production, they owned the companies, they owned the institutions that were going to make the food, which is now good. Supermarkets are becoming a big thing now. Lots of things that are spreading across the country in various different ways. Albertsons and not Sprouts and Whole Foods. Sprouts and Whole Foods are more so the type of stores that are popping up now. But you look at like all the generalized ones, all the big ones, and so this way, the people in this industry, they would keep American consumers going back for more quantity of food. So the quantity of food increased with packing things in multiple layers of stuff and getting more packaging and food inside of this, plastics, all that stuff. And while searching for more quantity and while constantly searching for more quantities of it. And so they did this in a lot of ways. I don't want to get down a rabbit hole here, but they did this by inventing things like quote unquote food science. And the big one, which is why the Make America Healthy Again movement is super huge now, and why it's good that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Nicole Shanahan and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and Marty McCary and all the other guys that are over there doing these things in the government, and and Casey Means and Callie Means and all of these people that are talking about Make America Healthy Again, and we should look at our food, we should look at our water, we should look at our farming, we should look at our vaccines, we should look at all these things. This is why was a remarkably popular issue in the last presidential race, certainly, but now we're seeing the whole movement of the crunchy mom, the movement of the girl that drinks everything out of a mason jar, like whatever you want to call it. And so the reason why that's so popular now is because of a correction that was started back in the 1960s, 1970s by the food companies, who were formerly the cigarette companies. Because what they did to make the food more addictive, our food that we're still eating every single day more addictive, was by playing with chemicals. The same chemicals that are in various concoctions you make in a lab, that were in cigarettes, that were in everything to basically keep you hooked and addicted. And so what they did was not necessarily sprinkle tobacco into the food, like that would be disgusting and people wouldn't eat it. But what they found was in doing these science experiments with food, they found that the overall composition of food was the most important thing. You needed the right amount of mix of different things, of different chemicals and ingredients and formats and recipes to make food addictive, and to make sure that as America evolved past cigarettes and past tobacco and past all these things, that we were still getting hooked on the proper stuff. The recipe didn't change. The only thing that changed was the industry. And this is where pharma comes in. So the pharma companies started to realize, as this was happening, as this transition was happening, that America was getting fatter and sicker than ever before, which has exploded now. I believe 70% of Americans right now are either overweight or obese, which is nuts compared to where we were before this happened back in the mid-20th century. And so pharma companies started to see this, and they saw a massive opportunity to quote-unquote help the problem, which is providing everyone who had this issue of obesity, of hypertension, of heart disease, of stroke, of high cholesterol, legalized drugs to quote-unquote treat the illnesses. So instead of saying stop eating crap and go exercise and get out in the sun, as people did for the entirety of human history, here's a pill for that. Here's a shot for that. Here's your blood pressure medication. Here's your high cholesterol medication. That's what they did. And it became, over time, the biggest arm of our quote-unquote healthcare system, which is hilarious. And if you look at the economy of healthcare and the spread of this, Casey Means talks about this in her book, Good Energy. It's really fascinating. I highly recommend that book. Healthcare is not healthcare as we define it. Healthcare as defined in America right now in end of 2025 is sick care. It's not making people healthier. It's caring for people that are sick, and it's enabling people that are sick. It's cosplaying as healthcare, but their only purpose is to keep us hooked on something else while still keeping us on the hamster wheel of the standard American diet. Notice, all of the ownership is on Ozempic, on the jab, on this pill, on this, that thing, whatever. And none of the ownership is on the consumer. None of the ownership is on the citizen. And instead, we are enabling the consumer to descend into worse and worse and worse health outcomes while doing nothing to stop them. And to be fair, it's not the corporation's job, especially in this space, to solve the problem of responsibility and ownership based on the American citizen. That's not their job, and it shouldn't be their job. But we need to understand this for what this is. And so, hey, keep eating McDonald's every day, keep down the gallon of ice cream every night, whatever. As long as you take your medication, you can keep your lifestyle as you want to. It's like, no, man. No, that's not okay. We shouldn't allow that. We shouldn't. But we do allow that. We do allow that. And it explains everything about why our country is so unhealthy right now. And the reason why it's so unhealthy right now is because of our addiction economy, because of limbic capitalism, because it is so easy and cheap and addictive to get this crap into our system. And it's pushed everywhere. Commercials, TV, news companies, everything. And it's not going to get better until we solve this and have the hard conversation about it. But it's a fact at this point that our companies and our, this sector of our economy along the physical lines is designed to addict you and to make you unhealthy. And it's destroying people. It's absolutely destroying people. But even though the physical part of limbic capitalism is destroying people, that was not enough as we move forward, because this couldn't go on long. It wouldn't have been sustainable because of the internet. That's the biggest thing. That's the transition from the physical to more of the digital, the mental, the spiritual components of all of this. So our addiction economy, our limbic capitalists took over and hijacked the food companies, the pharma companies, etc. for a very, very long time. But now what was the biggest deal was that these folks were then able to spread that into the digital economy as well. And this is, by the way, exactly what they wanted, exactly the thing they needed, because before they had to get a conduit to the brain. So it had to be a physical transfer of hijacking the limbic system before, which is, again, food, pharma drugs, television to a certain degree, everything else, but it was not nearly this omnipresent thing that was designed to hijack and to take over your limbic system. And so, but now, with things like the internet, phones, streaming services, streaming technologies, the people that were in charge of the digital space had a direct beam into the head of everybody who wanted to keep up with the world as it was, which everyone is. Everybody has a phone. Everyone has an internet connection. Internet is being viewed as utility now. It's no different than your electric bill, your water. It's being viewed as utility. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong, by the way, because people how can you survive without the internet in the United States today? I don't know. I was born in it, so maybe that's part of my philosophy on it, but I don't see how you can. And also, conveniently for them, the limbic capitalists, the people that were, in charge of making our economy transition to this way, this is how also they were marketing everything. They were spreading everything out to people with propagandized messaging, with advertisements, with Facebook ads, with Instagram story ads, with Twitter ads, everything like that. That's what social media was. Social media, the reason why social media companies make money is not because of the user base, at least directly, because it's free to register for Facebook. They don't charge you for making a Facebook account. They don't charge you for making an X account. They don't charge you for making an Instagram account or a WhatsApp account or whatever. So the reason why they charge you or how they charge you is through advertising. All social media is an advertising agency for larger corporations. They work hand in hand with corporations to market whatever they want to market. And so with the addiction economy sinking into social media companies, the irony of all of this, man, is defined. I've done a lot of research over the years into Facebook, because Facebook, in my view, is the defining company of my lifetime. I was born in 1997. I think Facebook changed the world permanently in inalterable ways. And so I've done a lot of research read a lot of books, articles into Mark Zuckerberg, into Facebook, into the early founding of the company and how the company evolved with Chamath Palihapitiya and Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else like that. And so A lot of feelings towards the subject. I've researched it very, very in depth because I think it's important. And the irony of all of this in the digital world with our addiction economy and our limbic capitalists is that if anybody doesn't know what Mark Zuckerberg's initial mission for Facebook was, it was very simple: connecting the world. Mark Zuckerberg, and I think he meant this genuinely. I think he did mean this. I'm not of the opinion that Mark Zuckerberg is an evil person. And that might be controversial, but I don't think Zuckerberg is an evil person. But I think Zuckerberg's a naive person. I think he's incredibly naive. I think he's way too idealistic, which is oftentimes worse, by the way, because all communist dictators are idealistic and they end up killing like 60 million of their own citizens. There you go. I'm not saying Mark Zuckerberg is like Mao or Stalin or somebody like that. Not saying that at all. But that's what he said, and that was a stupid thing to say. Because the thing about addiction and an addictive product like Facebook is that it gives you the opposite of that. It gives you the opposite of addiction. And so the best decision, or definition rather, I forget who said this, it might have been Anna Lemke or Andrew Huberman or somebody like that, someone who really knows this stuff much better than I do. But the best definition I've heard of addiction is the gradual narrowing of things that give you pleasure. I think that's an outstanding definition for what addiction does and for what addiction is. And so what our limbic capitalists realized is that in order to best keep people addicted, you have to flood the zone. You have to just flood like fire hose, drinking out of a fire hose, just drown them, drown the consumers in all these addictive things. Social media, we'll talk about all these stuff. And social media is an easy example. We'll talk about more in a second, but just drown people in all types of hijacking, brain-altering, limbic-altering capitalist methods, products, services, whatever, in the digital lane. So you're always surrounded by it. You can't get away from it. Can't turn your phone off. Can't do without seeing an advertisement, whichever. So you flood the zone and incentivize people to isolate themselves. Because the thing about addiction is that addiction cannot thrive. It can't thrive unless you're by yourself. It's very hard to be an addict to something when you're in community with people and you're being genuine with people. You can hide it, but if you have people that care about you, they're going to ask about, hey, what's going on here? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? And so why you see this is why you see the most shameful parts of the limbic capitalist system of our addiction economy being done online. And so there are a couple things that exemplify this in my view. And so you have online gambling for small hits of dopamine, which we did a whole episode on gambling a couple weeks ago. It was very well received. Gambling is a major problem. And now with prop bets and all the stuff with the NBA and all the stuff with sports, it's never been easier to gamble because it's right in your face. Every sports media show is incentivized by it. You have it all on your phone. You can bet on the number of rebounds someone gets, the number of points, the number of minutes someone plays, etc. And it's all broken up and nobody can track it. And everyone's like, whoa, this is really wild. And you have these crazy 11 factor parlays that people are doing back and forth. And it's nuts. So you have gambling. You have social media that replaces in-person social networks and the establishment of the community and, in my view, the most important, the building of a social fabric. The reason our social institutions are dying, whether that's, and to use I'm not really a fan of them, but to use bars as an example. No one goes to bars anymore. And in part, that's a good thing because I don't think alcohol is good for you. But people don't socialize. They don't go out anymore. Why? Because everything's online now. For young people, their whole world has been online for most of them, a lot of them. And so there's no social institutions. There's no Lions Club. There's no VFWs. There's no AMVETs. There's no community center. No one goes there anymore. Why would they? They have no incentives to. So social media has effectively replaced that. And the worst of, the most vicious of all, and I could be biased in this because this is my issue of many, but my worst issue, which is pornography, internet pornography. No more magazines anymore. This is why the older generation never understands how bad online pornography is. It addicts everybody it touches. I do not know a person that has watched porn once who said, yeah, I did once, it was enough for me, that's fine. No. You see pornography one time, especially as a man, and you're hooked immediately. You can't stop. You cannot pick it up and put it down. You cannot control your pornography usage. I don't care what someone says. I don't care what they claim to be. It's not true. It's just not true. It's not. And also on a more spiritual level, what porn does is it completely inverts and subverts how sex is seen and done throughout our culture, in the movies that we watch, in the way that young people actually do have sex, in the way that a bunch of people, like all this stuff. It's very, very bizarre and strange and demonic and evil. And all of this, which is what makes me so angry, is all of these issues are particularly issues with young men. Gambling, porn, social media, all issues. Well, maybe women in that context in some cases, but the most vicious forms of social media, like Reddit forums and X threads and everything like that, it's all designed to cripple and to neuter and destroy young men. Because all of these vices are designed around things that are supposedly set to give them status. How many friends do you have? How much money do you have? How much money do you throw around? How many women are you sleeping with? How many girls are you talking to? All of it is designed to hijack the brains of young men and to set them up for failure, which makes me unbelievably angry because it's predatory and it's wrong and it's stupid. But no one has the guts to call any of this out, any of it, because it's quote unquote capitalism. No, it's not. BS. Addiction is not capitalism. We throw drug dealers in prison. Why? Because they addict people. And by the way, the guy who deals drugs always gets a longer sentence than the guy who's addicted to drugs. Why? Because he's doing the worst crime. Because he's destroying the life of another person. And all of this is going to lead, inevitably, I see it now, happening right now, into the next generation of this, which is, so Mark Zuckerberg was on Theo Von's show a couple of months ago. Maybe this is a year ago. It was at least a couple of months ago, but a year ago, let's just say, between that time. In the last year, he was on Theo's show. And he said the quiet part out loud, by the way, like he didn't hide this. He said that the next step was to, quote unquote, solve the loneliness crisis, because there is a loneliness crisis. Loneliness is working for you than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So don't get lonely, get friends. But Zuckerberg's solution to this was to quote unquote solve, again, solve, that's a funny word to use in this case. The loneliness crisis was through AI friends. Oh, we can solve the loneliness crisis. We just, we'll hit you up we'll design a custom AI for you that tells you everything you want to hear, tells you nothing you don't need to hear, all that stuff. We'll just take that right over for you. We're seeing this with the first AI marriage happened in Japan recently. This is going to come to America. This is going to be a civil rights issue. I want to marry my AI. I want to marry my robot. It's going to happen. I guarantee you. It might sound nuts now, but it's not going to sound nuts soon. It's already happening in other places, in other countries. In the loneliest parts of the world. In Japan, very lonely country because there's not a lot of people. They're in population decline. South Korea, the exact same way. Influencers that are all AI. Actors and actresses that are all AI. And on a personal level, if we can digitize friendship, if we can digitize romance, what else is left? Like, what else is left for us not to be addicted to be hooked on emotionally, financially? And the answer is nothing. The answer at this point is nothing. If they can hook us on addictive romance and friendship capacities, they can hook us on everything. And so it can't get worse than it is right now in the way that it's going right now. It will get to that point, which is why we must fight tooth and nail against this to help solve this. Because the way this is going, man, we're all going to be in chains. Virtual, physical, whatever. And a lot of us already are. And we need to stop that because no American should be treated that way. No person should be treated that way because people don't deserve to be addicts. And decision-making matters, like I said earlier, but no one deserves that type of bondage at all. So everybody in America, including me, is addicted to something via limbic capitalism. I won't ask you, well, I can't ask you, but I won't ask you what yours is. Mine are a couple across it. I'm not immune. Just because I'm talking about it doesn't mean I'm immune to it. I'm not. And I'm not, and I want to be very careful about this. I'm not telling you can avoid it. The limbic capitalism, the addiction economy, because I don't think that you can anymore, to be honest. I think it's just here. We just have to deal with it. It's an ever-present reality. It's here. But there are ways, which is where, again, we want to focus on things you can control at the end of the day. There are ways that we can limit its power and influence in our lives, which involves systemically going through all levels of how limbic capitalism is implemented and breaking the chain so it doesn't totally enslave you. Because it will. And we're seeing this right now. People are enslaved to their bad health, their gambling debt, to their credit cards, to everything that they want to do. I don't want that to be you. I don't want that to be me. And so what we need to do is reverse engineer the formula that we just discussed this whole episode about of limbic capitalism, of the addiction economy. And we need to undo each step or take a big step to undo something in that step of how people get enslaved to limbic capitalism, to the addiction economy, and we need to break it. And so the how, the physical, and then the digital is how we need to go about it. How limbic capitalism happens, how it happens physically, and then how it happens digitally and intangibly. So the first thing I would recommend to stop the how, this is the biggest thing that a lot of people need to do, don't use debt. Don't use debt. Debt is the primary mechanism that opens the floodgates of the addiction economy, of limbic capitalism. And I have wrestled so hard with God over this. I go back and forth on whether or not to use debt from a biblical point of view. I've used debt in bad ways. I've used debt in good ways. I've struggled about my mortgage. I've struggled on all the coaching I've paid for on credit cards that I've paid off. But I've struggled on that. But what I've come to realize is in almost all cases, I would argue, I don't know if all would be, I don't want to go absolutist on this, but I would argue almost all cases, debt is a bad thing. It's not good. In fact, it's the opposite of good. It's very, very not good for you at all. Debt is bad. Some business debt might be fine. Some mortgage debt might be fine. Some credit card debt in the short term might be fine. But for your mental state and for using it in a consumerist perspective, I think that's what I want to hone in on here. If you use it to enhance your lifestyle through limbic capitalism, I'm just going to buy like a new jacket, or I'm going to buy like a fourth couch, or I'm going to buy a TV, and then I'm going to buy my computer, and then I'm going to buy my phone. I'm just going to swipe my credit card, $10,000, run it up in debt, 20% interest on a credit card. Do not do that. Do not do that. And so many people do it. So many people pay for all this crap, all this nonsense on debt. Things they don't need, on money they don't have. Make it make sense. It doesn't, by the way. It doesn't. So if you find yourself in a position where you are using debt daily, my recommendation would be very simple. Just stop. Stop. Do not use debt to finance a lifestyle you can't afford and do things you can't afford to do, because it's not worth it. It's absolutely not worth it. And I've seen it happen in many people before. It's destroyed a lot of people that I know, a lot of people that I love, and it's just not worth it. So that's the first thing. Get out of debt as much as you possibly can. Do not use debt in almost all circumstances, especially if you're just clout chasing, keeping up with the Joneses person. Don't do that. Second thing is you need to prioritize your health. So in the physical world, the best way to go about fighting the addiction economy and limbic capitalism is to prioritize your health, is to make your health if you have a bunch of fires that are burning in front of you and you can only put one out, you only have one fire extinguisher to put out one fire, make it your health. Make it your health. Do not eat crap food. Do not do things that make you miserable. Do not be dependent on anything that props you up and gives you the ability to live your life in the way that you desire. Get off your antidepressants. Get off your Ozempic. Get off the crap food. I don't want to curse. The crap food that you eat from the grocery store. Eat well. Work out like a maniac. Find something you like to do. Join a gym. You can join Planet Fitness for $15 a month. Do some push-ups in your garage. You must control your body if you want to live the life that you desire. Because if you don't control your body, other people will control your body. Other people, the limbic capitalists, the addiction economists, will find a way to hijack and control your body by controlling your brain. But if you control your body, if you're sovereign over it, it will keep it, you will be kept out of the hands of our vultures, of the parasites in the limbic capitalist system, so they can manipulate you. Do what you can to prioritize your health, control your body. And the most important one, by far, is the last one, which is the more digital, spiritual, mental capacity of everything, emotional capacity of everything, of limbic capitalism, the way to fight against limbic capitalism. You must, and I mean you must, establish a multi-layered group of in-person and physical communities. You absolutely must do this. Absolutely. This is the most important one because it trickles out to others. The ripple effect is through everything that you see. Whether it's, again, the food you eat, the debt that you have or don't have, etc. And not just one, by the way. You cannot just have one community of people that you result in, like your church, your synagogue, your mosque, whatever. That's fine. That's great. I would recommend that be the primary one. But you must have several in a layered capacity. Groups of friends, groups of people you can rely on, groups of people you can look forward to see throughout your week, so that you can make sure with absolute certainty that you are not digitizing your social life to addiction culture, to limbic capitalism, and they can hold you accountable to things like your usage of debt, your health, as I mentioned earlier, other levels of consumption. Because if you isolate yourself, addiction thrives in isolation, remember that. If you isolate yourself from people who are involved in this culture, I guarantee you will be freed from it. You will not fall prey to it. You will be a free person, a free man, a free woman. But you need to have people around you who can enforce that, who can make it easier for you to deal with the storms that come inside of your life. And you do that through finding real people and spending real time with them and getting to know them on a real basis. That's how you fix it. And if you don't, you're going to end up in a heap of trouble. Because no one can do this thing alone, especially in a culture that's so sick and so depraved and so savage about getting your mind enslaved. You need to do life with people. It's an absolute must. It's not an option. So get friends, get healthy, get out of debt. Do those three things, you'll live a very, very freeing life, a very fulfilling life. I guarantee you. And you won't be stuck in the psyop that so many people are right now with all of this stuff. Thank you all for watching. Own the day. Open your mind. And I'll see you guys next week.